As I mentioned, it took me several rounds to get my control board looking the way it does now. For the first round, I went over to my buddy Phil's house to tackle the project. I brought over all my plans and gear since he had all the tools. As for the materials, we tried 2 different front panels. The first panel we tried to cut was a white dry erase board material. Since I wanted my control board to be white, I thought it would save me a step from painting. When we tried cutting it with a jigsaw, it just ended up cracking, and we just couldn't get any clean cuts out of it. So we ended up using 1/4-inch MDF board I picked up from Home Depot. We traced all the equipment on the board and used a jigsaw to cut all the sections, hoping to get the gear to fit nice and snug. We spent over 6 hours out there in 100-degree heat trying to get it right. But as you can see, the lines weren't perfectly straight and the edges were a bit jagged. So I went back to the drawing board and decided to rethink my plan. I ended up picking up another MDF board and retraced the gear. This time I made sure all the measurements were perfect. I did some research and ended up connecting with a local woodworker. I figured he'd have better tools and have more experience making these type of cuts. He ended up using a router and overall it turned out better, but it still wasn't what I had envisioned. I tried sanding the edges to fix the imperfections but just couldn't get it perfect. That's when I went to my third option and looked into working with a CNC specialist. I ended up finding a guy through Craigslist and headed down to his shop. The name of his shop is called Radiant Surface Concepts. The shop was super organized and it had all the proper tools needed to complete my project. The owner of the shop is Robert Sapo. He specializes in a number of things from custom cabinetry to elaborate lighting fixtures to unique signage. Seriously, if you needed something built, this guy could do it. I took the shop along with the second board I created and we ended up using it as a rough template. When he saw my initial board, he suggested that we mount everything so that everything would sit flush onto the board, creating a more clean, recessed look. In order to do this, we had to precisely measure everything. This part was super tedious. We ended up measuring every square inch of every piece using a caliper, which allows us to measure everything to the 1,000th of an inch. It was super cool seeing the project come to life and seeing it digitally on his computer. We ended up using a really high quality MDF board for the front panel. The thickness was about 1/4 inch, similar to the ones I previously made. There were several steps involved in order to create this board. It was my first time working with a CNC machine and it was pretty sweet seeing it make the cuts. When I was watching, I couldn't help but laugh thinking I was originally trying to do this by hand. There was just no way you can compete with the precision of a CNC machine. Once the board was cut, it was sanded several times until it was super smooth. You can see that the apex fit perfectly in place. When I first contacted Robert, I was planning to have him cut the front panel for me, and I was going to paint it and make the cabinet myself. But after seeing all his equipment and seeing how detailed he was, I knew it would probably turn out better if he painted it. He ended up using white semi-gloss lacquer, which helped prevent the panel from feeling sticky. The first coat he put on was a primer. This makes all the excess wood particles stiffen, allowing us to sand it more and making the panel even more smooth. So remember how I was planning to make the cabinets myself? Well, that didn't happen. If I had to do it myself, it would have taken me at least a couple of weeks in my schedule. Not to mention, I didn't have the proper tools. Having the proper tools makes all the difference. The idea was to make it like a medicine cabinet and to have it sit behind the control panel. I wanted the ability to open and close the cabinet so I can easily access the gear. I originally envisioned 2 cabinets sitting behind the control boards. One for the actual gear to be mounted to, and the other for storing all the extension cords and wires. You'll see later that I only end up installing one of the cabinets in my stand to leave room for future equipment down the road. I wanted to make sure I used every square inch of my stand wisely. Overall, I was super happy with how my control board and cabinet turned out. Robert killed it.